clearly a tragedy in the city of Charleston.
What happened in that room that night should never be forgotten.
I believe there are still some good people in this world, in our communities, who really want to do the heavy lifting.
We don't celebrate what happened 10 years ago. We remember who we lost.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me.
Powerful. That's where we begin on this Sunday. 10 years since one of the darkest days in this state's history. This was Tuesday. Mother Emanuel Church, hundreds of people gathering there. The very site of that mass shooting, that hate-fueled shooting 10 years ago when 9 church members were killed during a Bible study. Not the happiest place to start on a Sunday morning, but those lives deserve to be remembered here in South Carolina. 10 years since Mother Emanuel Church. That's how we're going to get you started on this Sunday in South Carolina and get you connected to the Capitol, because there is a lot of fallout from that shooting that happened all those years ago that will never, ever be forgotten here in South Carolina. Catherine Glenn Foster, Dave Wilson. We marked a dark day on Tuesday in this state, but an important day to talk about those lives. And we can't show those faces enough. I know we have plenty of pictures of them. We do want to show those victims again as we talk about what happened all those years ago. It's still so fresh.
It really is. 10 years later, and it's still so powerful remembering the impact of that day, those lives lost, and all the fallout, all those missed years, missed connections, missed legacies. Absolutely tragic. Targeting people at a church where the only thing they're trying to do is learn about God, worship God, in some of their most vulnerable moments, and to take that and really pervert it, to change the very message, the safety, the refuge of a church is it's so evil.
It is. It's sickening. That was one of the longest days I've ever had in this newsroom for so many reasons. The hours didn't matter. It was what was happening. Yeah. I remember that story developing just as we got off the air that night, and I didn't leave for 30 hours probably, as they worked to track down that Dylan Roof, the shooter, and that's all we're going to say about his name. Yeah. But since then, so much discussion about gun laws in the state, in the nation, but more specifically the push that gets only so far at the State House that we talk about many times throughout the course of this program is South Carolina's lack of a hate crimes law. Just one of 2 states that doesn't have one. The act named after Senator Pinckney, but it only gets through the House, and that's where it stops. And so many people have questions about why, especially when we here in South Carolina had such a racially charged moment. It's a difficult question to answer.
Sometimes you have legislative action that's based on a circumstance, and sometimes you have folks who say, let's stop and look at the entire situation, not just in the moment. And that is a place where you will so often see in the South Carolina House, bills can move through very quickly. Yes. We talk about liquor liability legislation that passed in a day. And then it goes to the Senate, the deliberative body. And the joke used to be, that's the graveyard where all good bills go to die. And there are concerns, keeping in mind we have a very solidly supermajority of Republicans in the South Carolina Senate. So when you have that in that setup, you have certain other ideologies that go along with that. The protection of free speech, the protection of religious liberty, the protection of Second Amendment rights. And that's the place where it doesn't take much in the South Carolina Senate to put a brake on a bill and stop it cold. And that is very often what you're seeing here, because there tends to be woven into language things that make the religious community concerned. Am I going to have prosecution because what my faith says may go against what some group of people may choose to do for their own lifestyle? Would that be considered hate? Then you've got the Charleston loophole, which is a whole other issue, but we can discuss that in a moment.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and you also, so when you're looking at prosecuting two different people differently for the same crime, that also raises some questions legally. But when we're talking about policy as well, we really need to take a look upstream, because when we look at the hate crimes laws, what have they accomplished? Our mass shootings are continuing unabated in our nation. The gun violence rate is continuing unabated, and if anything is just increasing. We're seeing mass shooting after mass shooting. And so by the time someone has slipped through the cracks enough that they have that level of hate, then at that point there's not a whole lot that we can do by adding on hate crimes laws. So a better strategy really is to go back to the source, to start with education, to have really solid programs in our schools that are building humanity, understanding, cultural understanding, learning about equity, everything like that. Then we have good systems to evaluate and identify those people who maybe are heading in the wrong direction mentally, psychologically. Identify them, get that early level of support. And then once that's all taken place, then we can start taking a look at what happens when someone slipped through the cracks.
Yeah.
Then we look at the universal background checks and making sure that we don't have some number of days where if there's a backlog, magically you get your gun.
And that's what happened. That's what
Exactly.
this Charleston loophole is
Right.
named for.
Right.
Dylan Roof was able to get a handgun, even though he had a drug charge
Right.
on his record, but because that 3-day, 72-hour window had expired and they hadn't found it yet, he can legally buy the gun.
Right.
Exactly.
And technology has changed over the last 10 years. Being able to do a background check can be faster, but if all the data is not there, you've got a prime situation, exactly what we saw with Roof, that while he had a drug charge, it wasn't enough to be able to be flagged within a system, and the data wasn't collected there in the right way.
It was not.
And I've purchased a handgun before. You go into the store, you fill out the paperwork, they check you on the system. If you're clear on the system, you're good to go.
Or clear 72 hours later because it hasn't
good to
come
go.
through. So we need
Go ahead.
Yeah, we need to close the Charleston loophole. We need to make sure that we have strong red flag laws so that if someone does notice a problem, it shouldn't be long, but enough time for law enforcement to come in and prevent these kinds of tragedies. And then finally, once we have all that in place, we also need better just physical safety mechanisms to just retrofit buildings to have the kind of security that can prevent mass shootings again.
And that's where the politics comes into play, because what you're seeing in this particular case is a very core group of gun rights supporters who are very determined that the Second Amendment says what it means. There shall be no law that infringes on that. And that's the place that we're looking at right now.
And all too often, those people are the same people who oppose the kind of education that might prevent these kinds of shootings.
So the push will continue, not only at the state level, but also at the federal level. We saw quite a push from Congressman Jim Clyburn in recent years to close that loophole, and I don't think he's going to stop anytime soon.
Not anytime soon.
So we'll never forget those 9 names.
Right.
So please, each and every year in the month of June, we know that we will make sure that they are memorialized. When we come back here on Connect to the Capitol, we're going to look ahead to a changing of the guard eventually at the State House. We don't know who it's going to be just yet with the governor in place, the governor's mansion, but there's a new name that we know is about to declare for the race this week. That's when we come back. All right, this week we are expected to learn more about one of the worst kept secrets in South Carolina. Alan Wilson, the current Attorney General, by all accounts, sources close to this situation say he's got an event coming up on Monday where he's going to say, yeah, I'm running for governor.
Really?
I think
Surprise!
I think everybody watching knew that. Alan has spent a good amount of time on this program in recent months, talking about a number of initiatives that were pushed through at the State House in terms of protecting children from cybercrime, protecting victims of human trafficking. So he's going to make it official on Monday. Surprise, surprise.
Who'd have thunk?
No, never.
I remember a conversation that I had with him probably a decade and a half ago when he had become Attorney General. And, I said, where do you want to be in 5 years? He said, significant in what it is that we're doing. And this is that first step for Alan Wilson. I mean, it's the first step towards the next step. Correct. Because keep in mind, Henry McMaster as the longest serving governor in the state of South Carolina.
No, he's got no more eligibility, let's say.
Cannot run again.
College football eligibility.
He's got to move.
Right, he's got to go. The red shirt is now gone and replaced with a new red shirt. But, Alan Wilson's going to be getting into this first of the week. Word has it that Josh Kimbrell out of Spartanburg, probably by the end of the week. That leaves us with Nancy Mace and the current Lieutenant Governor, Pamela Evans.
We've got some video of all four of them, just so all of us can familiarize ourselves with. There's Josh, probably out of the four. He's an upstate guy, so folks here in the Midlands may not be as familiar with him, but he became more vocal this year at the State House. So those are your four potentials, and of course Congressman Ralph Norman is lurking somewhere in the shadows as a potential fifth.
And let's not forget Representative Jermaine Johnson.
Correct, on the Democratic side of things. Jermaine Johnson has become a prominent voice in the Democratic Party at the State House. When I don't care what your political bent is, when Jermaine talks, you listen.
Yeah,
you
and it's not because he's 6'7".
It is because
well, it helps.
It does help.
But he has a way about him that helps him to connect with people.
He has a charisma that really resonates with folks. He's been also a guest on this program and for a Connect to the Capitol Extra, just sharing actually a lot about what we've talked about today, even talking about hate crimes. And his insightfulness on these issues is really unparalleled.
And so that puts us at a place right now. We are 11 and a half months out from the primaries for the gubernatorial race. You've got at least a 4-person race, maybe a 6-7-person race on the Republican side. It will almost guaranteed, and we start betting now, that it will go to a runoff because I don't think anybody's going to get 50% plus one.
No.
Right.
So that puts us at about this time next year, we're going to be having the conversation about who's going to end up being the Republican nominee. If Jermaine Johnson has no other competition, probably will have at least one of the two other people that drop into this race. But that's going to put up a very unique pairing because that's going to put two new faces at the state level in these gubernatorial slots. And I think you've got an Alan Wilson who's got decades of experience. Pam Evans has been lieutenant governor. Nancy Mace has been a congresswoman and a state representative. You've got Josh Kimbrell, who's been second-term senator now, former radio talk show host in the upstate. That's a huge mix of folks. And
strong field.
Very strong field. And the other part about it is it's all going to turn out to whether or not you end up showing up at the polls, because the average voter turnout for primaries in South Carolina, less than 15%. That means you show up to vote and all your neighbors who live around you don't.
They need to come with you.
Exactly.
Yes.
This is a big, important race. I know presidential races are really the straw that stirs the drink, but governor's races do. Local politics do. Vote. That's the bottom line.
Exactly. And it's the local politics that has the most impact on your day-to-day life. They're the ones who are impacting your roads, your state and local taxes, all these other elements of daily living that, what goes on at the national level, it's important. But when we're talking about how we live our lives, that's local.
It's right here.
Well, it goes back to the conversation that we had last week with Councilwoman Oddity Bustles.
And we're going to have more on that in the next segment.
In that next segment, when we start talking about the fact of what's going on when it comes to conversion therapy and what's different in this city versus another, or hate crimes that we talked about a few weeks ago. We have hate crimes ordinances in Richland County, but you don't have them in other counties. So the government that's closest to you does have the biggest impact on you.
Yep, absolutely. Well, coming up next on Connect to the Capitol, keeping the lights on in South Carolina. Another thing we've talked about. Now there's a plan officially signed into law to do that. That's when we come back.
Little old South Carolina, this little light of mine, we're going to let it shine. God bless.
Senator Luke Rankin. Now it's Sunday in South Carolina. But what you see there, Governor Henry McMaster just a few days ago signing into law the Energy Security Act to ensure that every one of us watching right now can flip that switch in our house and make sure the light bulb comes on, because it's growing, the population and the need for power. So, we talked about this a few months ago. This is part one, I think, of a legislative action, though, to make sure that the infrastructure and the power grid is up to date.
Right. We've had one, in the last 15 years, we've had 1 million people move into South Carolina. We're expecting another 1 million to population increase over the next 15 years. So you're watching rapid growth in this state. You're seeing businesses come into this state. You've had a lot of in-migration from other states coming to South Carolina, a huge rise in retirement population as well. So people are saying, what's a good place for me to move to? But the other thing that we have been talking about is things like data centers and manufacturing, which are extremely high in power consumption.
Exactly. We want to continue attracting big business in that way, and we have been talking with a lot of business leaders in our community, and that is one of their number one concerns that they've expressed is, how do we continue to make sure that we will have the energy that we need going forward and that we're not creating brownouts in the broader community.
And that ends up impacting up and downstream again, that ends up impacting what goes on with economic development. That ends up having an impact on what goes on in rural and urban growth. That has impact on education. It has impact on so many different things. So this one energy issue, to meet the demand, is going to be extremely important if you want to see things like taxes continue to go down because we have more taxpayers.
Yeah.
Exactly.
We've got that graphic with the facts about what this means real quick, just so we can put a visual up there for folks. So they know exactly what this Energy Security Act there expands nuclear capabilities, natural gas, hydrogen, renewable energy. The hope, of course, is to protect all of our wallets as these things are built. Those cost money.
After I just paid the bill?
And, and you will again. Energy independence. And the last part, I think, is what we all agree is most important. Oversight of these projects, because we remember what happened in Jenkinsville. Multi-billion-dollar project scrapped after years of rate increases.
But it's still sitting there.
Still sitting there waiting to be finished.
Waiting to be finished.
And maybe somebody will.
Right, and also continuing with that idea of common threads throughout the show today, talking about speeding up approval, just like that Charleston loophole and needing to make sure that we get those background checks processed quickly, we don't have that lag. Similarly, we're going to be speeding up approval here so that we can make sure that we get the answers that we need.
And you've got production of energy that's going to be happening and a grid that can turn around and handle it.
Quickly, one other thing to follow up on from last week. Conversion therapy ban in the city of Columbia. This week, a vote, the first vote to repeal the ordinance that bans conversion therapy in the city of Columbia. Only city in the state that has something like this on the books. However, they, as we noted, they were told by the AG's office that this is in violation of state law, particularly a budget proviso that says you can't have something like this or you risk losing funding, local level funding. Almost $4 million.
$3.7 million.
So looks like this is going to go off the books.
Right.
Exactly, which means that the city of Columbia will receive that $3.7 million, but it kind of goes back to that struggle between state level, local level government, and the state level government using the budget in this case to try to shape policy in local communities.
And if you'd like to see more about this, we had a Connect to the Capitol Extra with Councilwoman Oddity Bustles, and it was a really good discussion about what goes on in the city of Columbia, how city growth has changed, but also how that level of state versus local governance really comes into play, especially when in the state budget they can attach dollars
anything they want
to actions.
Yeah, to any type of action. It might be just for a year, but it shapes policy.
It does.
From up top all the way down to the bottom. Like you said, it's so important, every level of politics, but it starts at where the rubber meets the road, as they say.
And it shapes public expectations as well. You teach with the law. So as we teach through the budget to the law, that can actually shape policy for years, decades to come.
And the way that you watching shape things is by voting. So when we wrap things up here this week on Connect to the Capitol, we're going to talk about an issue that some folks are taking to court when it comes to the vote. We finish this week with the importance of the vote. Who you vote for, where you vote, how you're represented in the nation's capital. This goes back to redistricting, the districts, the congressional districts of South Carolina, and how you cast your vote and who that would be for. It's being challenged in court this week. State Supreme Court, in fact, the South Carolina League of Women Voters and the ACLU challenging the congressional redistricting maps that were drawn up by state lawmakers after the latest census data came in, something required by law every few years. But they're saying the way it's drawn up is based on partisan politics and is not representing all sides of the coin, so to speak, in the political spectrum.
Mathematically, look at it, though. I mean,
Yeah.
there's 7 congressional districts, 6 are Republican.
Yeah.
1 is represented by a Democrat. If you look at it from the standpoint of race, racially it is imbalanced as well. But you've got a situation right now where estimated 28 to 33% of South Carolinians are, if we were to register by party, would be Democrats, but they only have 1 out of 7 seats in Congress for representation.
So every 10 years we have a census, every 10 years we have redistricting. After the last redistricting, we saw a lawsuit from the ACLU alleging that the redistricting was racially motivated. This case went all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, and last year we found out in Alexander v. South Carolina NAACP that in fact that would not be allowed, obviously, but the state's defense was that this was not a racially motivated redistricting. In fact, it was a partisan, a political party motivated redistricting. So, taking them at their word.
Is that constitutional?
Yes, is that constitutional? ACLU and League of Women Voters said, well, we'll take you at your word. Let's see, is that constitutional? Because that sure sounds unconstitutional too. And every state with similar language in the state constitution, partisan gerrymandering violates free and open elections. So states like New Mexico, Kentucky. So it's going to be really interesting to see oral argument on Tuesday and and exactly what they argue. Apparently it's not going to be race-based anymore, and we'll see what happens about the partisan-based. What's the next line of defense here?
Based on what you say, though, it might not hold up.
Well, and it's also why we also talk about the fact that voting is so important, because keep in mind the map that was built by the legislators that you voted for in 2020. Because they're the ones who built the maps that were starting to be used in 2022. So this is why elections do matter and voting is so important.
Yeah, we talk. That's why we do this show, to explain what it means in everyone's house, at their front door, for their wallet, for their family, because everything that happens at that state house, whether you like it or not, it's going to impact your life in one way or another. So we're trying to break it down as simply as we can.
One final word.
Yeah, go ahead.
Before we wrap the day, it is Sunday in South Carolina, and somebody's having a birthday today.
Is that so?
Happy birthday, Catherine Glenn Foster.
We should have led with that. We could have done 30 minutes.
We could have 30 minutes on that one.
Oh, happy birthday.
We at least tried to coordinate colors here.
We had Father's Day a week ago, Mother's Day a few weeks before that, and now we have birthday.
Yes.
So there we go. Well, if you all have birthdays as well, happy birthday to you.
Yes.
Regardless, have a wonderful week, and thank you for always joining us every Sunday here in South Carolina on Connect to the Capital. We'll see you in a week.
See you next week.